Hey, it's Adam here, your internet chess coach. In today's video, we're going to look at some of Hikaru's Blitz games online. And my goal for analyzing and looking at these games is to understand how a Super Grandmaster 3200 rated online on chess.com, sometimes 3300 rated players able to dominate players that are in the 2800, 2900, and even 3000 range. So I'll put a link to all the games below if you just want to watch the live replay. If you want to watch and listen to the commentary as well, then stay tuned for this video. Let's jump in. So first game we're going to look at, Hikaru is playing with the black pieces. I'll flip the board versus Speed of Light. His rating is 2977. Let's go. This is played in real time. Okay, so Hikaru plays some version of potentially a gambit at the start and transforms it into a Benoni variation, which looks like it's going to turn to a check Benoni with pawn to d6. He's getting a closed structure out of the opening, which I find also quite interesting, rather than play for open games. d6, bishop g7, and h5. h5, quite surprising to me. Typically, before we have h5, I would, myself, when I'm thinking about this position, look at what are the potential pawn breaks that black has, and black should aim for the move f5. That's his key pawn break. White should aim for pawn to f4. h5 I find really interesting. I want to see if he's going to play for h4, or just keep the pawns on light squares on h5. Very interesting move. So he plays h4, and now he's getting a grip on the dark squares. He plays g5, and this structure already is very favorable for black. Black has access to this f4 square with the knight, with knight e7, knight g6, and knight f4 at the right moment. Also, if black castles on the king side, everything is locked down. Hikaru can still open up the position on the queen side with b5. I think white's still doing really well. The knight on d1 now can come to e3 and then to f5, where black should definitely capture that knight or avoid it with very careful maneuvering. But most likely capture the knight on f5, ideally with another knight rather than the bishop. Okay, very clogged position. White's done a good job maneuvering that light squared bishop to improve it as well, stopping some queenside play. Knight's hitting the h3 pawn, and if he takes, Hikaru takes back with the e pawn, activating potentially the rook on the e file. Also, this square on e5 is really, really strong enough. A black knight can get there. All right, as we go along, try to anticipate the moves. I'll continue commentary, and I'll not pause it so much here. I would take that, 97, 95. Maybe a rook e8 first. Maybe we can get to play f3 as well, stopping white from playing f3. Okay, not a big deal. Queen d7. c4. Wow. Okay, queen c7. We have a very strong knight versus bad bishop. Maybe the bishop isn't so bad here, but yeah, it looks pretty bad actually. Look at it more. f3, g4. This is total domination. Rook's going to come to the g file, open up the white king, and win the game. g8, king h2, take with the knight maybe? Yeah, maybe take with the knight. Okay, takes with the rook. Rook g2. What to calculate here? Rook g2, king h1. Um, f3 pawn is hanging. Maybe we could trade queens, but I don't want to. What? Oh, no, he sacrifices the rook to win the queen. What a nice move. Okay, now how to infiltrate. Rook takes. What's the plan? You could go rook g8 and trade off the rooks, and then queen takes on e3, which should be winning. I think he goes for it. Yeah. Oh, he doesn't. Okay. Thought that would have been winning. Now the c4 pawn falls, but I guess you have just queen e5. Yeah. Bishop h5 check. Takes. King g8. Queen f2. Or queen h2. And rook e1, rook g1 should finish it, I think. Yeah, in this position, his opponent resigned. So let's head over to the analysis of this game. And I uploaded all of these games to a study on Lichess. I haven't turned on the engine, analyzed them just yet. If you want to take a look at the games on Lichess, I'll put the link to the study at the bottom here. All right, so let's begin. Pawn d4, pawn c5. So this is called the old Benoni. White goes pawn d5, and black plays pawn to e5, getting a very close structure. Knight c3, d6. Let's turn on the engine. White has a 1.1 advantage here. If you can't see it, let me check. Okay, so we are on the screen. Okay, so white has a 1.1 advantage. Again, I'll put the link to the study below. And white has a nice space advantage afforded by this pawn on d5. But the trouble white can come into is if he's not able to open up some lines with the space advantage, maybe he can't find a way to infiltrate. So a key idea in this structure is to play for e4 if you want to. You don't have to. But the main idea is making a pawn break with the move a3, b4, or completely dominating the queen side with pawn to a4, not letting black play a6, b5, which is what happened in the game. But then secondarily trying to get this f4 advance. Typically, white will go e4 first and then f4, trying to break down on this e5 square and activate on the f file. White wasn't able to achieve some pawn break like that, and let's see where that happens. So a6, a4, g6, g3, bishop g7, and I was very surprised by this move h5, but his idea is to play h4, and after g4, the f4 square becomes weak. Another key theme in this structure is to trade the dark squared bishops. All of black's pawns are in dark squares, so the dark squared bishop isn't felt as much in this case. I think yeah, white should have played h3, and after h4, still g4. Interesting how black is claiming a grip on the dark squares by this h4 move. Okay, bishop h6, takes g5, and a key move here computer recommends is a5 with the idea of maybe queen b1 and b4, or queen d2 castles, rook b1, and then pawn b4 is a critical pawn thrust. You can't play f4 anymore. It's completely locked down. The only way to open up lines is on the queen side, and the only move really that I see is this move pawn to b4. Knight to d1. I like this idea heading into the f5 square. f6, knight c3. Still completely fine for white. There's no serious advantage, but strategically, if white isn't able to open up the lines here, I think black's going to do some serious damage. Now, I thought the king could maneuver to h2 covering this. Hikaru was able to install the knight on e5, so maybe it's going to be a mistake to actually trade this knight. Let's see. So knight e2, the engine drops a little bit in evaluation, king f7 and takes, and black has the advantage. So white was not paying attention to his critical pawn break, maybe couldn't figure out a way to get it under good circumstances, and he missed that opportunity to, I think, here play a5. And after b5, you could take en passant, and after queen takes, the c4 square could be really strong for the bishop or the knight, and uh, then again, maybe pawn c3, pawn b4, or pawn b4 at the right moment. This would have been at least better than in the game. Okay, let's get to our position. Knight jumps in, and he makes a mistake. So after the game, we're going to go to our Excel file and point in the mistakes, as well taking this way allowed some potential push, but already black is having a very nice, very comfortable position. I like this move, pawn c4, getting access to the c5 square, also limiting the light squared bishop. Maybe not 100% necessary, but really forceful and dominating. Sure, queen c7, rook a3, b5, castles, b4, super strong move b4, stopping any opening of the queen side on white's terms. f3, g4, everything's so consistent in his game, and then he finds a really nice way to finish the game off. I was thinking to bring the queen over maybe, but he finds a beautiful idea. Rook h2 takes, and let's put that in a brilliant move, I think. Rook h2. Sorry, let's not put it on king h2. Let's put it on rook h2. Brilliant move. Knight g4, take, queen a7. And here I thought the best idea was rook g3, which gives away the entire advantage, surprisingly. Oh, if the king, only if the king takes, it gives away the advantage. If you, rook to e1, you cannot take because of bishop h5 check, and the e3 pawn falls. So, tactically, didn't quite work. Strategically, it's a good idea. Hikaru finds a better idea with the queen coming in to the e5 square, takes on b2. These pawns should win regardless. Just get a new queen. Pay attention to some checkmates, but there's really nothing for white here. It's completely game over. And then rook e1, rook g1. His opponent resigned. All right, let's head over to our analysis page. So game one, opening, Hikaru was black. Forget the person's username. Let's put it in here. It's speed of light speed of light. And we'll put Hikaru was black. For opening, I'll just put it here. It is the old Benoni. And a very close position. Okay, main reason for a win. Hikaru had a strong, let's say good night. I mean excellent night versus, probably excellent's better. Excellent night versus 4 bishop. And a tactical blow to win material. Okay, main reason for loss is white was unable to find activity with the b4 or f4 pawn break. And in addition, he got a significantly worse position after the trade on f4 because black took back with the e pawn, opening up the e5 square for the knight. All right, notes. Black's technique with h5, h4 secured the grip on the dark squares. He traded dark squared bishops, which is favorable. Prevented white from any real counterplay. Yeah, he played just extremely consistent. And white, yeah, again, I want to emphasize this, white didn't have a single threat the entire game. All right, let's take a look at the next game. In this case, Hikaru is white, his opponent is black. Castles. Okay, knight c3 defending the pawn first. Knight e2. Maybe c3. Okay, knight g3. I'm trying to guess the moves. You're welcome to guess along. And I encourage it to guess the moves here. If you have any questions why some moves weren't played or why some moves were played specifically, just comment below and I'll try to answer them. Okay, so structure is very defined. White is playing on the king side with f4, maybe c3 at the right moment. Hikaru traded off his light squared bishop, all his pawns are on light squares. He has a very strong pin against that knight now. Maybe he wants to go h3, knight h2, knight g4. That's something I might play. Queen d2. Defending the knight. Now pawn to f4 looks like a good idea at some point. Maybe you don't want to open the dark squared bishop. Not 100% sure there. Okay, he goes for it. He opens up, goes for the main pawn break. Does he take or double the rooks? I think, okay, rook f3, knight f3. Interesting move. What's the point? Bishop takes f5. Pawn takes. Maybe g6 for black. Maybe, yeah, maybe just pawn g6. And then, okay, he takes. So black is up. Pawn, I think. Yeah. And this pawn on f6 doesn't look so appealing. The bishop on g6, quite a good defender. He goes a4, stopping b5. And if b5, you take, and go b3, fixing the structure. Very interesting, playing on both sides of the board. Okay, so b3 anyways makes sense. Knight h5. Knight h4, sorry. g3. Wow, what an interesting move. Stopping what? We'll take a look afterwards. The queen on d2 hits the a5 pawn, not anymore. And he's rerouting his knight to better squares. f4. What does he want to do from f4, though? Knight f4. Then rook e1. Trading. Black is a pawn. Just trade everything. Okay, he just keeps the tension. Still, I like rook e1. Bishop g f5, I don't understand so much. Yeah, now the f6 pawn hangs. Okay, could take on f6. Take the rook. Get material back. He wants checkmate. Oh no. Black is getting mated and just resigns the game. What a nice, out of nowhere, queen to h6. All right, let's head to our analysis. So game number 2, Hikaru with the white pieces plays e4, e5, bishop c4. Knight f6, pawn d3, c6, and knight to f3. Pawn d5, and bishop to b3. I don't think you want to take this as white, because your goal is to keep this strong structure and not give black his very flexible structure in the center. After bishop e3, knight c6, black is doing quite well. Completely equalized. So bishop to b3. Now the question is, what happens if you take? Then you get hit with knight g5. Engine says knight g5, and if bishop g4, bishop f7. This is good for white. So you can't take just yet. Bishop e4, bishop d2. This position was played in 2018 between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Bishop d6, knight c3, d4. d4 main move. They're following some theory here, and this is the first point of deviation with pawn c5. Okay, pawn c5, knight g3, knight c6, bishop e6, and bishop a4. This is an interesting move. Is this a move that you would consider when you're playing the game? To willfully move your bishop once, twice, and 3 times early on in the game in order to trade off a knight. Typically, players try to keep the bishops versus knight, but now what Hikaru is noticing, I think, is that the structure is very defined in the center. His pawns are on light squares, so his goal strategically is to get a position where he has a better minor piece than black. In this case, he's hoping that a knight is able to be slightly better than the bishop after this trade. Maybe you could also damage the pawn structure, which is going to be very useful for white. So bishop comes back, black recognizes this. Hikaru just takes anyways, not wasting any time, stalls the knight on f5, and black castles. Engine says completely equal, but we notice a big difference between the bishop and the knight. Queen d2, bishop t7, and knight h5. Knight h4, sorry, and pawn to f4. I was wondering whether pawn to f4 should be played, but what I realize now is how important it is for white to activate on the f file. And even though it also opens up black's dark squared bishop, it is consistent with the main pawn break. The position is still remaining closed, and the knight's are quite strong on the king side. I thought another plan here was to go h3. Queen d2, best move by the engine. h3 with the idea of knight h2 and knight g4. But after h6, you're getting kicked away. Bishop h4, king h7. And if we go knight h2, what happens? Then we get kind of stalled on the king side with g5. And he can't go g5 right away with this knight covering. For example, like let's just say rook e1, g5 would be a massive mistake, I thought. Apparently not that big of a mistake here. I thought you could sack, which you can apparently, but the knight's going to be eliminated. And engine says it is just an equal position. Very difficult to assess. After queen f3, I don't know if you take because now the rook's coming to e4, rook to h8, rook e4, and black is slightly better here, but I think really difficult to play for both sides. White may be much easier to play, actually. Okay, let's go back. Queen d2. Bishop d7, knight h4, a5, f4, rook a6, takes, and knight to f3. Knight to f3 I thought was a very interesting move because it blocked the rook on the f file. It also allows black at some point to take, and you can't take back with the knight or the rook, which is ideal. And the question strategically is, why did he play this move? I was anticipating black taking on f5, and after the knight takes on e5, bishop retreats to c8. I thought maybe g6 as well, but after bishop c8, you could have done this, and black has some pressure here, but the rook defends quite nicely. You should probably get out of the pin, maybe play. Yeah, not so clear what this bishop is doing. Maybe play queen e7 to kick the knight away. And the bishop still covers g4, so there's no knight g4 idea. Black is perfectly fine here, but white does have some pressure. So he had the opportunity to go for this. He went in the game. Bishop moves back, and this gave white a significant advantage with a tactic which Hikaru missed, which was knight takes g7. So try to calculate what the best follow-up is. After knight g7, if black takes, what's the point? Can you find the idea? It is pawn to e5, I believe, after. Let's see. Knight takes, king takes, pawn to e5. Bishop h6 also good, but pawn to e5. Just taking advantage of the pin. King is in a very rough spot here. The best move is bishop f5, blocking the f-file temporarily. And white just maintained control over the position. Gonna win the piece back with a nice advantage. Okay, Hikaru missed this, but he goes e5, which allows bishop takes. How much time did he take with this e5 move? 4 seconds. Bishop takes, and black has an advantage here. I thought g6 should be played here. Let's see what the computer thinks of g6. It absolutely hates it because of this idea. Bishop h4, queen to h6, and that is really, really favorable for white. Okay, I thought that if bishop h6, then black was fine. You just move the rook, you bring the bishop back. And you can even keep the bishop out. If the queen ever comes in, then you bring the bishop back. And it's true that this is the case, but tactically, there's this idea of bishop h4, queen to h6. Okay, he takes bishop f4, bishop g6. Black is slightly better here. Takes, and a4. I found a4 to be an incredible move. I'm going to put a good move here. And the idea is after b5, takes, b3, white can stack on the a file or just keep pressure on the a5 pawn for a long time. And this Move a4 fixes the black pawn structure in a way where he can never break on the queen side without creating more weaknesses. If you don't go a4, I'm not sure if it's that big of a deal, but let's just say he goes rook f2, then black will play a4 himself. Maybe he can put pressure on b2, and if you ever go b3, you can take and open up the a file. You can also, after b3, develop the rook to a8 and then take at a favorable moment. Okay, so a4, queen c7, and g3. What an interesting idea. Engine doesn't like it, but Hikaru's idea with g3 is to re-route the knight, covering the e1 square, or head to f4. What can we learn from this move, g3? Even though the engine says it's not correct, he's seeing that this trade is simply unfavorable, so that's not very useful. He sees that maybe knight f5 isn't so useful either. The knight's improved, but after like rook to e5, rook to e6, maybe the knight doesn't have a really good potential. If you ever go queen h6, then we can take. So he finds a way to reroute the knight. He also controls f4 as well. But I think the main idea he's looking for is he's trying to find some play rerouting the knight. Rook to e8, rook to f2, covering the infiltration, b6. So black played b6 here, allowing his queen to take an active role, but he had to move pawn c4 here. Again, this is a pawn break, and in the previous game, he was unable to find a critical pawn break to activate his pieces and get a potential weakness for his opponent. And if you take, the bishop opens up, queen takes. If queen takes a5, then bishop takes c2, and black is doing very well here, this passed d-pawn. Okay, he misses the chance to play pawn c4 here and plays b6. He could still go c4. Engine recommends rook f1. Now it says b3, just stopping any access for black to infiltrate and get counterplay. Knight g2, queen e7, knight f4. And I thought, okay, rook e5 makes sense, but I thought just trade. And at least you're completely equal and you can't lose this game as black. And you're even slightly better here. If king g2, rook can come and attack the pawns from behind. And I don't see any way white can win this game. So I was surprised black, being the lower rated player, didn't go for this. He's 29.75, which is an enormous rating, but he can gain like 2 points, maybe 3 points for getting, maybe more even, for just getting a draw. So rook e5, rook f1, and now he goes completely wrong, moving his bishop to f5, lining up white's rooks on the f-file, losing control over the h5 square, and this is a blunder. So what was he thinking with this move? What do you think Black's idea was? He wanted to get activity with bishop f5, bishop h3, but at the cost of giving Hikaru just an enormous attack now. It's completely game over. 2 moves, game over. Okay, so Black had a better position the entire game. He had the chance to make a pawn break, failed to see it. Let's go to our analysis. Game number 2, we have, let's put this in black, e4, e5, and Hikaru went for bishop c4. And Hikaru was white, and same opponent was black. Okay, let's put this in. Okay, that's fine actually. Main reason for win. White found a tactical blow with knight h5 and knight f6 and Queen h6, just completely winning the game. And main reason for loss is black was unable to get activity with c4, but more importantly, maybe he was too ambitious. He blundered, more importantly, blundered with bishop f5, allowing counterplay, allowing significant counterplay. So he didn't see the danger of knight h5. Okay, notes. Black was completely fine the entire game. White missed a tactic with knight takes g7, followed by e5. Besides that, black could have played for a draw and traded off into a slightly better endgame, up a pawn, but went for more and it backfired. All right, let's take a look at the next game. Okay. Next game, game number 3. White is speed of light, Hikaru black. For this game, I'm not going to comment as much. I'm just going to, for my own chess improvement, I'm going to do more analysis afterwards. This is your chance to also anticipate the moves, try to understand the plans. I'm going to be thinking, anticipating my mind. Okay, I may comment a little as well this game. We'll see. If anything pops up as interesting. H takes. Knight takes. Wait, knight takes doesn't work. Bishop g5. Just knight d7 looks fine. That's an interesting move. But does he really want to take? Bishop takes, queen takes. Hikaru's happy with that. Queen takes c5. And rook c8, maybe he doesn't want to play. Knight takes g6, wow. Okay, this either is really good or really bad. Knight h8. Then queen e6. Queen t5, going for a counterattack. Okay, queen takes g6, queen h1, king f2, rook f8, king e1, queen take, wait, queen Maybe queen takes h2 immediately. Yeah, and take the bishop, and if rook h1, then queen g4, queen h7, king f8. Still, it's really tricky, actually. Okay, if you take rook h1, then you have queen takes g3, so I think you could go for it. Yeah, this just doesn't work for white. Rook h1, queen g3, king d2. And then what? Maybe just queen g2 there. You can't go king d1 or c1. So you have to go to e3. And I don't see a mate. So maybe just like rook. Okay, rook f7. Going for a checkmate. Do you play queen h7? Just eliminate any attack. Here you might have bishop d5 and e6, surprisingly. It doesn't go for it. Okay, e6. Take on a8, take on f7. Rook takes g7. Oh, but then the bishop on g5 falls. Rook takes, queen takes a8. Queen takes g5. Hikaru sacks back material. Now the rook is hanging and the bishop is hanging. The bishop's hanging with check. What a brilliant move. Absolutely brilliant move. Absolutely brilliant. Also very strong move. That's game over. Completely game over. White resigns the game. Very impressed with the defensive skill there with bishop b7. Let's go to our game analysis. Hikaru with black pieces. Let's turn on the engine. Pawn to e4, pawn c5, knight c3, a6, f4, b5, knight f3, bishop e7, d3, and we have a close Sicilian. White's main plan is h3, g4, f5, or just f5, queen e1. He goes for e5 right away. Knight d5. Important to note that he doesn't take here, allowing the pawn to take. And not only that, but the bishop opens up and the rook opens up on the f file. So he keeps the bishop and the rook at bay by knight d5. Also played that instantly. Queen to e1. Takes, takes, and castles. Black is slightly better here because of white's damaged pawn structure, but white does have a nice space advantage at the moment. And here white plays f5, which is a slight mistake, but not that big of a deal. It's not the best in this case. Better was g4 first. And f5, just not giving away potentially the f5 pawn. But Hikaru takes with the d pawn here. And after takes back with the h pawn towards the center and bishop g5. Here I thought queen d6. Okay, knight d7 is a perfect move, but queen d6 makes a lot of sense to me. Getting off of the pin, covering the third rank, and playing knight d7 next. He got into a bit of a pickle here. After knight d7, bishop h3, rook to e8. Still better. Queen f2, and f5. He went in the wrong direction here. So engine says knight to f6, and if you take, then queen d5 going for mate. If bishop g2, we take, and take on g5 is winning. So after queen takes, White has to insert this move, and then black still retains his extra pawn here. Rook a7 and bishop f3. But white has the two bishops. Not so clear what you're going to do with this knight. Can't really go to d5, g4, h5. So very difficult to play. Knight f6 in this case. The knight is under attack, and this pawn is also a little bit under attack. There's also this pin. So there's a lot of pressure here, and Hikaru makes a mistake with f5. You could also just ignore it. I wonder if just rook c8 makes sense. Yeah, rook c8's fine. c4 engine likes best. What about queen c7? Queen c7 also fine. He doesn't want to go f6 and allow like bishop to e6. So I think this is where he had some slight difficulties. And he took, I think, his longest decision of the game and went f5. And I don't like f5. Even though it temporarily blocks the bishop, you can play the move, wait, g4 then f4. Okay, maybe the reason I don't like it is just this diagonal, but something that white did was try to take advantage of it with knight g6, taking advantage of that weak pawn. And you can't go e6 because of the pin. So black a little bit off this game, but better because he's up a pawn, and if he plays with perfect defense. Knight f8, and white sacks. White sacks the knight and gets an initiative, but it's not enough. So white's over ambitious, trying to play for activity. Black is better here, so black is just going to play queen d5, e6, consolidate the position. f5 will be completely defended. Maybe king h7, and then maybe knight e7, knight f6. Black will be completely fine. And white won't have his initiative at all. So he goes for it immediately, just sensing this is the moment. And after takes, queen d5, queen takes g6, queen h1, takes, and here queen takes h3. And I was anticipating rook f1, which just completely loses to bishop takes, which was missed. Rook f7, queen h7, queen e6. I thought bishop d5 here, but it doesn't work at all. After e6, queen d7 defends. Bishop c8, queen d5, e6. Better was queen g6. Very scary move to make because of like rook f6. But after e6, you can take with check and then with... Okay, so Hikaru had a lot of time here to think. And he's using his time quite well and trying to find a defense. Bishop c8, hitting the queen. Queen d5, keeping pressure on the pin. And playing a mistake with e6, but also a very difficult move not to play, because anytime you move the rook, it comes with a check. So he immediately blocks it. e6, queen c6, not taking the rook because of king takes rook here. And after rook f1, king comes back to g8, queen's coming to g6. And black is a piece. So queen c6, I would say actually is a brilliant move. And if the king takes, then white wins the game with rook f1. If king g8, then queen takes on e8. And then Hikaru finds the only move in the position. The rook is threatened. If you go rook f8, he takes and takes on h1. He finds the only move connecting the rooks. Bishop to b7. White is back in the game by taking, but he's slow on time as well. Queen g6, rook takes. The threat is a double attack. Maybe this is why Hikaru saw bishop e7 and queen g6 and thought I'm going to be getting my piece back anyways. And takes, and black collapsed here after white collapsed here. After rook f8, you cannot take the pawn because of rook f5. So bishop to e3, hitting the pawn. White was able to get back in the game, actually. If this pawn drops, that's actually, I think, fine. If white can win this pawn on e5 or just stop the pawn from advancing, then the bishop will be able to hold on to the queen side. The combined with the rook, maybe create some threats, maybe even win the game down material. Highly doubt it, but it's possible that white is going to have very solid structure. The white king will be safe on e5, able to maneuver, and he just blunders in one move. So let's go to our sheets. Game number 3, Hikaru was black. Speed of light was white. Put this in black. And the opening was a closed Sicilian. And Hikaru plays a6, b5, bishop b7, g6. And not knight e7, but he goes knight f6. And white plays for e5. Okay, I'm just focusing on Hikaru. Main reason for win, black had the advantage the whole game. And white gave away material, looking for an initiative. I would say gave away material incorrectly. Looking for the initiative. Sorry, I'll come back to my sheets page. Sorry. Looking for the initiative. Looking for the initiative. And black defended very well. So main reason for win is black defended very well. There was a lot of counterplay by white, but black was able to successfully hold and come out with material surplus. That's the main reason for his win. Main reason for loss is actually white blundered the game with one move after a lot of trades and trades of queens. He missed a simple tactic with rook f5. Notes: white was able to get back in the game with an initiative. And Hikaru didn't find the absolute perfect defense, but a defense that was good enough to secure his edge. When black had a discovered attack with the queen, Hikaru chose a more simpler approach and then found a brilliant and only defensive move. All right, can you start to see some patterns here as to why Hikaru's winning and why the opponent's, even though it's so high rated, still losing? Is Hikaru's not making any significant blunders or errors, whereas his opponent is making some blunders a little bit, and white is finding a tactical blow to take advantage of it. Last game, bishop f5 was a blunder. Hikaru took advantage. And this game, his opponent at the end there blundered, and Hikaru took advantage. The last move was probably more simplistic, but nonetheless, Hikaru's not making any errors, noticing his opponent's errors and taking advantage of it. All right, let's take a look at game number 4. Hikaru is white. Let's go. One sec. Let me switch to replay. Okay, Hikaru is white. Let's go. Trade of light squared bishops definitely favors black here. You could play g4, even though it looks weakening. In this case, white has a lot of space. Okay, that's an interesting move, securing the h4 square. You could take on f5. Okay, he just takes. Still covers the g4 square. Dark toward bishop trade, slightly favorable for white, although getting closer to a draw. I like the move g5, knight g6, knight f4 potentially, even though it looks a bit weakening because of h4. Yeah, now I don't like it. Okay, he goes f6, breaking. Hikaru secures position and castles. I'm assuming castles as well. Maybe knight d2 first. But yeah, castles makes just perfect sense here. Hikaru's thinking, so he's maybe seeing castles gives black just a completely safe position, and the f4 square becomes a little bit weak. So what does he have in mind? Taking a lot of time here. Maybe he's considering taking castles, rook f8, knight e2. Now he just castles. Okay, take, knight g6. Take. Maybe now black is not sure if he should take. I think just takes knight g6. And then you could trade off the rooks. Okay, this is why. So card takes the other way. Knight g6, knight h5, covering the f4 pawn. You have queen e7, queen h4 here. Knight d2, queen h4, queen f3, or queen g3, queen h4. Maybe just h3 and queen g3. Maybe not, though. Yeah, king g2, queen g3. Rook f7. Let's go rook f2. Rook f8, rook f1. Queen h4. Queen c5, king g2. Maybe king h1. Or king g2. Probably king h1. Let's see what Hikaru plays. Knight b3. Okay, secures the d4 square. Completely overlooked this. Purely playing defensively in the time that I was thinking defensively, Hikaru's gotten a strong knight in the center. I don't see why you can't just take this and play c6 or c5. Maybe just c6. Yeah, but f5 is coming. He sacks. He sacks a piece. This just loses. You can't trade queens here. Okay, he's down a knight. This should be quite simple now for white. For sure, black has a lot of pawns, but I don't think it's worth a full knight here. At least white has the ability to sack his knight back to get like 2 pawns, maybe. G5. Knight's coming to g4, then to f6. Knight f6. If h5, you could take en passant maybe. No, he reroutes his knight first. Okay, king d3. Let's just blockade the pawn. Let's go knight f2 maybe. Interesting how much initiative Black has gotten with this. Okay, you could take on g5, but then you lose the e4 pawn. e4 is hanging, so he goes. You could sack the knight, but obviously he doesn't want to here. King d1, king c1. Now he can take on g5. I was surprised he didn't go king h4 there, just going after the pawn. Knight f3. Now, he takes on e3 and takes on d2. That's extremely strong defense. Extremely strong. h4. In a winning position. Still very fast. Finding the checkmate. Okay. Let's head over to our analysis. Game number 4. So we're going to do 5 games today. This is game number 4. Hope you're enjoying it. Again, link is below if you want to look at all the games in the study. And if you just want to watch the replay of the games, I'll also post a link of that with commentary, or if you just want no commentary. e4, knight c6. Black is changing his repertoire, going for the Nimzovich defense with d5 here. White gets a nice solid center. Black has got his bishop outside the pawn chain. Hikaru is just developing quite normally, not playing for a huge edge. Plays g4. Takes. Key idea in this structure for white is playing f5. If you can achieve it and activate pieces on the f file, your pawns are headed towards the king side. That's your main plan. If you can achieve it, then you'll increase your space advantage and create the initiative on the king side. Knight g3, f6. I really like this move f6, challenging white center. Hikaru plays f4, just securing the center, and after castles, take. Hikaru didn't want to take with the f-pawn, weakening this f4 square permanently. After takes, queen takes or king takes, whatever, Black is going to bring this other rook back here and play knight g6, knight f4, and queen g5. And I think Black is perfectly fine here. You can even play knight f4, bring the other knight around, and Black is completely fine. Like, no problems, just slightly better position. Knight h5, queen d2, knight d2, rook f7, rook f1, knight b3, knight d4, and now white has the edge. So something went wrong here. In this position, rook f8, rook f8 gave white an advantage with rook f1. Better was queen c5 immediately, but what's the idea? If knight b3, then queen b6, and if knight d4, you have a sacrifice with the idea that at the end of the variation, the rook is going to fall. It goes like this. Knight takes. Not sure which knight, doesn't make a huge difference, but let's just say this knight. If you take, then takes. You cannot take back. Otherwise, queen takes, winning the rook. So Black had an opportunity here before making this move, rook f8, seeing some potential idea with knight takes. I think very difficult, but an idea to think about for future reference. Also, he finds queen c5, which, both these players incredibly strong. And black at least found this move, just one move too late. Knight b3, queen b6, or yeah, this idea. Knight d4, now it doesn't work at all. He just sacks a piece. He sacks a piece for getting a lot of pawns, but it's not nearly enough. Takes, 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 and queen c2. Takes, takes, takes. The problem is the engine says black has... Okay, now it just has no advantage, but even if it had a slight advantage, I think the decision is very risky to stack a piece, because if you can't find the way to proceed, and white just needs to think about some defensive moves to block the pawns, then black is just lost, which happens in the game. I do think personally, like, I don't know if I'd be able to hold this as white, but from a theoretical point of view, white is for choice for sure. So Hikaru plays quite normal moves. Moves that slightly improve his position, attempt to blockade the pawns, improving the knight, hitting the pawn, g5, knight h2, knight g1 I was very surprised about. The pawns are rolling really fast, e4, and black has a nice advantage here, which is kind of interesting from my perspective, because I wouldn't think that this would be something to aim for in the game. And not only is it potentially good in blitz, because you're putting so much pressure on the opponent, if you can find the way to continue, of course. But in a classical game, imagine sacking for this many pawns, and the engine says you have a -4 advantage. Pawn d4. A better move was taking, and reusing this knight, moving it somewhere, even trading off a pair of knights to play the move d4 and just get the 3 pawns marching down the board. It says it's overwhelming. The knight would not be able to not only stop the pawns, but black can pick up this pawn on g5 as well. Sample line would go knight f2, king f4, not even defending the pawn here, but king c2, king takes, king takes makes sense to me, king d2, king f4, knight g4, d4, the pawns are too much, knight f6, I think makes sense to defend the pawn, but computer says let's just march, and if you take, check, king d1, pawn c3, if king e2, pawn c2 wins. And if king c2, pawn e2 wins. And if you bring the knight back, then how do you win this? If you go d3, you lose your entire advantage because of this check. So king to f3, getting out of the check and supporting the pawn advance. If knight d5, then check. You have to block the pawn. If you don't block the pawn, right, you just get a queen, pawn c2. So let's go back. So black has a serious advantage. Maybe he didn't want to trade one pair of knights, but he could have in this case. And d4 still a great move. Takes, takes, knight f6, d3, d2, e3, and he takes the pawn, knight takes, king f5. Black is completely winning. I'll pause it here. Can you find the best way for black to win this game? How is black supposed to win? If we can push to d1, we're winning. The knight is currently dominated. Knight to e5, he can take, and the king is blocking the pawns. So maybe a4 is the winning move here, with the idea of just b3, takes, b2. And if a4 knight takes, then we have knight b2 And we're getting a queen next move. Let's turn on the engine. A4 works, G5 also works. A4, if you take, then knight B2 wins. His opponent misses it and he activates the king, which in turn allows the knight to be allows the knight to get back in the game with knight G5, knight F4. Black is still winning, by the way. Trying to push this pawn just in one move. It looks completely hopeless, but Hikaru finds knight F3, and the move that blunders the advantage is king C3, because now the knight can pick up the pawn and control D1. Best move here, super tricky, by the way, super tricky knights, is moving the king closer to the knights, king to E4. If you move the knight farther away, then you can sack the knight and get an equal position. Moving the king towards the knights, is that a move that you would consider? Moving your king towards the knights? Generally, we get a kind of afraid when we see knights rushing towards us. But the knights don't have any checkmate threats. White doesn't have any pawns that could throw in. He doesn't have rooks. So maybe we should think about this differently. Is move the king towards the attack rather than away from the attack. And Hikaru finds a way to pick up the pawns, and it's all over here. Knight c4, he trades. Also not the best move. He could just go h4, but he trades. And white plays b3, which loses. Better was a3. And if h4, then b3. The point is you cannot take because of a2. And the pawn is crashing through. You have to take, and if you take this guy, then you just take on a2. So he had a drawing chance here with not b3, but a3. Very low on time, but missing some key idea, which is that after b3, the knight controls the a3 square and the b2 square. So you can simply take, you can't push, and if you take, the knight controls the b2 square. So he had an opportunity to first control the a3 square himself, and the point is that after b3 you cannot take because the pawn is too fast, and after b3 if you take, the knight can't stop the pawn on the corner square. Very instructive, and the rest of the game quite simple, so that's why I went through it a little bit faster. Okay, let's head to our sheets page. And game number 4. Hikaru plays e4 again. Let's put this in. Okay, I'll put that in a second. e4 and knight c6 and d4. Hikaru was white, and speed of light was black this game. Main reason for win, Hikaru. Well, I think one thing that the players were unsure about was, I'll put this in notes. I believe the players were unsure about the evaluation and didn't realize black had a huge advantage with all those pawns. And because of this, black was, it seemed a bit panicky, seemed to rush to use his pawns instead of finding the most accurate way to maybe slowly advance them. with the knights on the board, it can be quite confusing as to what is our main way to proceed. Black could have traded a pair of knights and still use his extra pawns to advance, which is interesting. Even at the end, Black had a chance to not rush, but find the critical way to continue. Missed it. Okay, main reason for win is Black was unsuccessful in finding the correct way to continue, and White found the only defensive idea to cover the d1 square. It was literally just one move, one tempo, d1 square. Black should have brought his king closer to the knights, not farther. And then White was up minor piece and used it successfully to stop Black's last pawn. Okay, main reason for loss is could have gone in the opponent's favor. Black didn't understand or couldn't find the best way to advance his pawns. All right, last game for today. Hope you guys are enjoying it and can see why Hikaru is. I have a game number 6 here. Let's do game number. It's game number 5. Why Hikaru is winning against 2900. Even he had a worse position, but defended really well. Okay, last game. Let's see what happens. Black plays Sicilian. Get a similar game previously, but now White switches with d4. Hikaru going for e6. Queenside castles. Lots of pressure on Black's position. How does Black develop his pieces? I'm really curious. Maybe bishop c5. He goes knight f6, which allows e5. Now where does the knight go? He doesn't go anywhere. He simply creates a counterattack of pawn takes, pawn takes. Wow. Takes, takes, and pawn takes. Yeah, pawn takes on f6. And maybe bishop g7 and castles. Maybe bishop a3. But I think d5 should be played. If you can get f5 in, it'd be great. But the rook on h8 is hanging. Okay, knight f3. Maybe he just attacks. Excuse me. Bishop d3 makes sense. Bishop e2 is taking a lot of time here. Bishop e2 makes sense as well. He sacks? Oh, what a tactic. You can't take. So he takes the pawn. And the d7 pawn was hanging. Hikaru goes knight b4. Pawn d5 makes a lot of sense here. Oh, wait, the bishop's hanging. So bishop takes, takes, and then d5. Yeah, bishop takes, takes d5. Bishop takes. Hikaru is thinking. He's calculating. The g2 pawn is also a bit weak. The rook on h8 is hanging. If you don't take, he takes on a2. And then d5. Wow. Simplifies the position. Okay, queen f6 is coming. Queen b6 is coming. Now the knight can come to c3. Just take the rook. What is this? Take the rook. You're up material. How to defend here? Your rook on h8's out of the game. White has a very stable position on his king side. Hikaru activates the rook on the 7th rank. Still very tricky to defend here. He goes rook to e7, securing his king. And rook to f8. The h7 pawn is thingy. To take. Bishop takes h7. What is he thinking here? Queen to f6. Hikaru activates his bishop. You could take that. But then, yeah, you could take it. What, e5 is he going to play? Oh, no, you can't e5 because the queen's hanging. Is he going to sack? Is he going to take? Rook to queen e5. What does this do? f6, grabbing some space for his king. And now e5. And you're trading off the queens. Moving the rook to safety. White has a lot of pawns here on the queen side. c4 loses to rook g2. Okay, you can take. And can't take because of bishop c4, but maybe you take anyways. And just go like king e7. He doesn't take. He goes f5. He activates the pawn majority. Okay, you're threatening checkmate here. Hikaru avoids it. Nice defensive move. Pawn is hanging. Rook takes. Again, bishop c4. He doesn't give away material. Pawn h5. Wow. Now the pawn on e6 is hanging. Yep, completely winning. Completely winning. Just queen. His opponent resigns the game. Okay, really, really amazing game. Last game of today. Let's see. Hikaru with the black pieces. We get e4, c5. Let's turn the engine on. And against the closest ceiling, Hikaru goes for a6. Very small sideline here. 7% of the database is played. d4 takes. Knight c6. Queen d2. e6. b3. And b5. Bishop b2. Bishop b7. Castles. And rook c8. Hikaru's king is stuck in the center. And he hasn't developed his king side, but he has a slight advantage if he plays knight to b4. Just temporarily stopping the knight from ever moving because of takes, and if a3, maybe the the queen side is weakening a bit because the knight will move, and then b4 gets hit. Actually, no, engine says something different. You could bring the knight back, but black gets the advantage after takes, check, king b2 or king b1, king b1 says slightly better. Takes, takes, and take on e4. The a3 pawn is not hanging at the moment because of queen takes g7, but maybe you can do it anyways because queen f6. It says black has the advantage. And white's up a rook. Excuse me. Black has a piece and a pawn. Okay, quite interesting. Knight f6. Now white has the advantage. e5, b4. I was very surprised by the move knight f6 because it ran into e5. But Hikaru saw that after e5 you can play b4, winning a tempo. And if the knight moves, for example, to e4, which did not happen in the game, you just take it. Knight hasn't moved yet. And if you take here, which happened in the game, Hikaru is getting some development. So his timing of this defensive move, knight f6, you don't usually want to play knight f6 if you get hit with e5, but he has a counter shot with b4. Again, the engine says better move is knight b4, going for the sack, and if you go like bishop d3 defending, you could take the bishop, alleviating some pressure, and then knight f6. This diagonal's open now, queen doesn't defend g2. Knight f6, b4, takes, 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 bishop takes. This was a key moment. Bishop takes was very surprising, but you cannot take back because of the checkmate. So black loses a pawn with this entire sequence, and black is still completely fine. He doesn't take, he finds a nice tactic knight b4. If you take, then rook takes, 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 and bishop to e4 check, bishop t3, and bishop takes g2. And if king moves to like b2, then queen f6 wins. And if king d2, king, you don't want to do this, king's in the center. And you also lose material like this, but you get material back with the queen on the board. It's going to be very difficult to do. So a very strong idea, knight b4 here. Bishop c4, knight takes, bishop takes, d5, knight to c3, and I'm very surprised he went knight f3 here. You could just move the rook, but then you get hit with queen f6. So this knight being installed is absolutely deadly. The rook moves anywhere to safety. Actually, rook e1 was fine, just not lining up with this diagonal. And if you go queen f6, then rook to e5 is played. So going down material, not necessary here. And it says white is fine, but black again being up material can sack back material. This is the problem. Rook to c7. White has an edge here, by the way, so I don't dismiss this as white, but I think that you have to play it extremely well here. He plays it, f5, rook to e7, queen to g5. He has an advantage here, rook to f8, queen to f6, d4 activating the bishop, giving away material, knight takes, bishop takes, and now black has an edge with f6. Okay, so white had, I think, a very strong idea, and I would love to be able to play like this, just sacking material, going black into a very passive position, but how should he have played instead? After you take the correct move, I think is really tough to find. What's even the idea of this bishop e2? We're blocking the rook. Maybe it's to add pressure to the e6 pawn. Bishop d5. Best move is rook a1. Okay. Let's say bishop b7, which I don't think is good at all, but let's see. Then rook d1. Bishop d5, we take. If takes, then check. And the rook is lost. You have to sack the rook back. So takes. Computer says queen d8, but the king is completely open here after taking. Rook on f takes, and bishop h5. And black is lost, completely lost. So what did white do incorrectly? I think maybe he rushed it. He was trying to find a killer blow, and he just had to see he has a better position. Black is completely stuck in a zugzwang, and the correct approach here is finding this maneuver to then capture at the right moment, taking advantage of the pin. So he missed this key idea, bishop e2, bishop h5, keeping the position stable. And this allows Hikaru just one opportunity to activate his rooks, get some space, and play e5. The attack on the king is non-existent now at the moment. Knight e6, queen trades. Yeah, no more attack against the king, but I like the way white continued to press. He wins the pawn. Bishop attacks the knight. He takes, and now you don't take the rook because take with the rook because of bishop c4. Even here, black is better because of his connected pass pawns. But Hikaru doesn't like giving away material if not needed. He goes king f8, best move. Checkmate is threatened. He sidesteps with the king. King to f8, rook c5. White manages to get a pawn back, but was down on time. Okay. Pawn f4. Rook f8, getting behind the pawn. f3. Hikaru pushes pawns when he can. I've noticed this many times. If he has an advanced pawn, he really uses it to great effect, putting the opponent on defense. And it looks really much in black's favor now. His pawn's advanced so much. In the meantime, white hasn't even started. King c3, king e4. Not king f4 because of king d4, and white is able to dominate the black king. So king to e4, king d2, rook d8, king f4. I actually think bishop d3 was missed by Hikaru maybe because it maybe not. Of course, it's easy to say, but yeah, maybe not actually in this case. Rook d8, bishop d3, and king has to go to f4. Pawn on e6 is hanging. b4, rook takes, b5, blocks the pawns. I don't think he had to block the pawn here at all. He decides to, but he could have gone like maybe rook here and here. Okay, best move is just h5. Very computer move. Like, the rook still stops the pawns. If pawn push, then the bishop is lost. Rook b6. Now the king invades. It's completely over. He sacks, wins a pawn, and pawn pushing is too much for white. Rook can block f5. Okay, really wild game. Really wild game. Let's take a look at our analysis. Last thing for today. Hikaru as black. We have a Sicilian with c5 and a6 again. Same as game number 3. Okay, main reason for win. Hikaru successfully defended. A very strong opening attack with knight b4 and creating counterplay. And he defended and took his chance to play f6, e5. Okay, main reason for loss is white didn't find the right idea to keep black completely restricted. Spell that correctly. To keep black completely restricted, and the correct maneuver spelling I'll fix after. Correct maneuver was bishop e2 and bishop h5. Okay, and I'm spelling things wrong, but that's okay. I'll fix that later. Correct maneuver, bishop e2, bishop h5. White also didn't have to go down material. But what I find interesting, I'll put that in notes, didn't have to go material, but did anyways. What I find interesting is that even down material, white had the edge. Black was discoordinated, not coordinated, and white could have had an overwhelming advantage with finding the right idea. I wouldn't say perfect play, I'd say finding the right idea. Okay, let's pause here for today. And I hope this gave you some sense as to why Hikaru is 250, maybe 300 points higher rate than his opponent. Definitely gives a sense as to why he's the top dog or second best player behind Magnus in Blitz in 3+0. He's completely dominating this player in the score, maybe not on the board every game, but you can see why he's just a nick better than his opponent every single game, not giving material, finding the best defensive move, finding the right idea, and his opponent failing to capitalize when he has an advantage in several games. So even if you're having the advantage, doesn't mean you're going to win the game. Also, even if you're the better player, doesn't mean you're always going to have the advantage. Hikaru's defensive play was enough to make it very difficult for his opponent to find the win. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed today, and this was Hikaru Analysis Game. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.